Hi, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of Champagne and JD. I'm Andrew Champagne alongside JD Fox. As usual, our guest needs no introduction, and as usual, I'm going to give her one anyway, JD, because that's just the kind of guy I am. She's a tremendous author. She wrote a great book on Sir Barton called Sir Barton and the Making of the Triple Crown. She's also got a pretty fun project in the works that she's going to tell us a little bit about in this interview. We're excited to welcome horse racing author Jennifer Kelly. Jennifer, welcome to the show.
Yay! Thanks, guys. I'm really excited to be on with you both. I've been looking forward to this ever since JD brought it up. So, yay!
Well, I'm just happy you got the memo about the colored shirt. JD apparently missed his, although he did show it. I'm
Oh,
proud of him.
No, I'm glad we're not matching this week, Andrew. We always seem to match, Jennifer, and it's just completely coincidence. But one of the things that I love that horse racing can bring people together that wouldn't have necessarily met ordinarily. So obviously, myself and Jennifer met through Gift Horse. Obviously,
mhm.
a great little Secret Santa-esque for the horse racing crowd. That's put on each year. Teresa and Jason do a great job with that. So Jennifer drew my name, and I ended up reaching out because to be fair, I couldn't tell who had sent me the gift. I couldn't necessarily read Jennifer's handwriting off the cuff. I'm just putting it out there. So it was some
Do my
investigative
job.
journalism. I used my journalism degree for some investigative journalism, and I figured it out and found Jennifer and struck up a conversation, and she's as awesome as I thought she would be, knowing what she does and everything. So we're happy to have her on the show, many months in the making. And one of the great things that Jennifer brings a perspective. We're always talking about horse racing in the present on this show, and we're doing a lot of handicapping, and we're looking at racing as it stands right now. But I think for a while, Jennifer, it seemed like horse racing history was being lost a little bit. Now we have great authors such as yourself that are digging back through history and writing some great pieces before this stuff's lost to time. Can you kind of give kind of a genesis the last 5 years or so in terms of some books that have come out and kind of the resurgence of horse racing journalism in a long form book format?
Well, it comes and goes in phases. I think really for this modern era, you want to start with Seabiscuit, and I know that's kind of a hokey place to start, possibly. But what Lauren did with Seabiscuit was start a new way of doing horse racing history where you're not just telling the stories, but you're bringing in context and you're documenting your sources. So if you do have something that comes up, people could go behind you and find your material. And the popularity of it gave rise to more interest in publishing it. Milts had his books. He had a book on Dancer to Image. He had a book on Sugar that has come out in the last 10 to 15 years. Jamie Nicholson has written on Never Say Die, who was the first horse to win the Epsom Derby, first American bred horse to win the Epsom Derby. Dorothy Ars published her amazing book on Man of War. If you need any book on Man of War to read, you have to read Dorothy's. And then she followed that up with a book on Battleship, who won the Grand National. And then there's Peter's book on Spectacular Bid, and I'm sure I'm missing some because so many have come out in the last 10 years. But it's just brought about this resurgence of, let's capture these moments before things, get lost and, find a way to connect what came in the past to what we're currently looking at now. So, like last year with Maximum Security getting DQ'd, that harkened back to 1968 when Dancer's Image got DQ'd. And so you find a lot of similarities across eras. And that's one of the really nice things about, writing books like this is that I can bring these stories to people and they can find the parallels between what we're seeing now and what we've seen in the past.
Yeah, I mean, really, when we look at a sport in North America that has some detailed history that we can go back for and pull horses' names and jockeys and situations for 180 years, I mean, situations have bound to have occurred over that course of time. So really diving back in and finding those commonalities and really educating people, I think, is one of the really cool aspects of taking a deep dive through history. And obviously you got a chance to write about a horse that surprisingly hadn't been written a whole lot about, but Sir Barton, some of the great stories with that horse even before the duel with Man O' War, was already producing some incredible things on the racetrack. What was your initial interest that really brought you into wanting to research Sir Barton and eventually obviously writing a great book on the horse?
Well, I've been a horse racing fan since I was a kid. So I've always been interested in the sport and its history because I'm a history person anyway. And then I had a time period where I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do because the job I wasn't terribly thrilled with. And I really do like writing, and I wanted to make a transition. And so my husband and I were talking about well, if you weren't doing this, what would you be doing? And I said, well, I would like to write this book. And I told him the story of Sir Barton, and he said, well, you should see if someone else has done that, because if they haven't, you should do that. And I was like, okay, let me see if that's out there. And so it took me about a week to comb through and make sure I was right, that I had never seen a book about him before. Because, I knew the 100th anniversary of the Triple Crown was coming, and I knew it was going to be time for people to start having this conversation about where we started with the Triple Crown. And then American Pharoah happened, and then Justify happened, and it really started reviving interest in the history of the whole, shebang. And so, once I started looking around and noticing that nobody else had written a book about him, I was like, okay, now I have to do this. And then as I dug further and further, I discovered, why people really hadn't done anything on him. And I felt compelled to sort of be his advocate and to tell that story so that we have it. Because, you can read a chapter in each of the books on the Triple Crown and get a little snippet of the story, but you don't really get the whole story. And anytime I would read that little snippet on him in any book on the Triple Crown, and I have a lot of books on the Triple Crown, I always felt like there were these little things in between that were kind of missing, and I wanted people to have that. And since no one else had done it, why not be the one to do it?
That's for sure. One thing before we go too much further, one other book I'd recommend in your list of tremendous books that have come out fairly recently over the past 10 years or so, a book called Cajun Racing by Ed McNamara. Tremendous stuff. He talks a lot about riders like Eddie De La Houssaye, Randy Romero, Calvin Burrell, some really funny stories, some really ridiculous stories too. It's one of those things that you have to read in order to believe. It's a really quick read. Can't recommend that one highly enough if you're a horse racing fan. But the story of Sir Barton is certainly a story that's worth telling. This is a horse that entered the Kentucky Derby as a maiden. And then in the span of a month, he doesn't just win the Triple Crown, he wins the Withers, which was a darn big race back then. He came into the Derby off of a gigantic workout. I was actually reading part of your book before we went on the air. And just tell us a little bit of the story about how this horse, who some people were high on for a while, but went to the sidelines for a while, illness almost killed him. He comes back, he wins the Triple Crown. On face value alone, that's a heck of a story. Give us a little bit more detail on that for those who don't know.
Well, initially, he was bred and owned by John E. Madden, who is, Hamburg Place out in Lexington.
Not the football coach.
No, it's not. That's John. It's always an E in there because you have to differentiate. And Madden usually sold his foals, his yearlings off, and he only ever kept ones that he really wanted to race. So he kept Sir Barton through the first part of his 2-year-old career, and then ended up selling him in August of 1918. But the horse hadn't won any races yet, but Madden didn't really care about that. He just wanted to, race him enough, talk him up enough to sell him. And, he loses the next race, spectacularly. And then he goes to the Belmont Futurity, which is the juvenile race of the era, and comes in second. And so, they were all assuming this horse is on the path of breaking his maiden. He's going to do it any time now. They entered him in a number of stakes races, that Paul at Pimlico and places like that. And then he gets injured before a workout one day when another horse kicks him and the cut becomes septic and he, almost succumbs to a fever. So the thing about him is that when they started in 1919, their 3-year-old year, he hadn't won a race yet and they didn't run him. And Billy Kelly ran in several races prior to the Derby, so it doesn't make sense that they don't run Sir Barton until you realize that 1919 they still had a maiden allowance in the Derby. I don't know if they, I'm sure Andrew caught that. So like maidens got a 12-pound weight allowance. Okay, so instead of carrying 122 pounds, he would be carrying 110. And, H.G. Bedwell is no fool. And he's like, well, I'm just going to work him out and send him to Louisville just on the strength of these workouts. And they would send him in relays with stablemates. And he would go out there and beat their best handicapper. And he would beat Billy Kelly. And, he's obviously a horse of quality. And I think that's one of the reasons why H.G. Bedwell is so keen to not have him race before the Derby, because he really wanted to kind of keep that advantage, because he suspected that the horse had something up his sleeve that he had yet to show. And obviously the Derby comes around and, he does that. He wins by 5 lengths in like the most pedestrian time ever of like 2 minutes and 9 seconds, because the track was just awful that day. But he beats like the best 3-year-olds the country has at that point by 5 lengths, and just, his stablemates like behind him, and Johnny Loftus is looking back like, where is he? And he just kept going. Like, well, I mean, there's no one there. I'm just gonna keep running. And then, he does the same thing like 4 days later at the Preakness fast track. He just gets out to the front. He's like, boom, boom, boom. I'm gone. See you guys later. 14 days later, the Withers. And then, but the thing about him running in a Triple Crown, we think of it as a natural progression that you go from Derby to Preakness to Belmont. And it's an obvious path. And in this era, it's not. It's only ever been done one time before that, and that was the year before. So the reason why he ended up in the Belmont is a really little fluky thing that when I figured it out, it wasn't like obviously stated, this is why Sir Barton ended up in the Belmont. I had to find these little bits of little nuggets of information that came together to, here's why the horse is in the Belmont instead of being shipped to another racetrack to run in a different race. And it's like, I want to drop that hint because it's so juicy, but at the same time, I really want people to like read the book.
Yeah. No. So I'll speak, generalities. We talked about bridging today to history, and handicap racing in the United States has unfortunately really fallen by the wayside. Weight allowances, and that's where I'll give like my plug. One of the things I still love about Australian racing is you get these really odd quirks of you get these horses that are underclass but running at a very low weight against these classy individuals. And for Andrew, I'll point this out. I just remember the first Grade 1 Group 1. I screwed up in Australia. They're gonna come after me.
Uh-oh.
But the first time Tom Melbourne was in a Group 1 race, he went in that race because he had a weight allowance that allowed him to go in at 52 kilos, which is 114 pounds against horses that were 130 pounds and above, and won the race because that situation happened. I mean, that's such a big weight advantage, and you still get that. And throughout history, you have to go back and remember that there are these allowances even in races like the Kentucky Derby, and it helps shape decisions that were made at the time, which may seem weird without that little tidbit in history.
Well, and it's funny because that was the last year that they had the weight allowance.
Yeah.
Like once Sir Barton came in and exploited it, you can find it in like the Daily Racing Forum in 1920. They're like, oh, BT Dubs, we're not going to do this weight allowance thing anymore. Like, sorry. You're like, everyone's going to have to run at the same weight. It's just funny. It's like, he just totally obliterated that. Churchill's like, oh man, did we do that? Oh, our bad. And then just got rid of it.
That's funny. One of the other things that you mentioned is just a couple of days after Sir Barton wins the Belmont, 4th win in a month, emerging as one of the best horses in the country, there's this big red horse that's running at Belmont Park as a 2-year-old. Johnny Loftus is riding the horse. Of course, we're referring to Manowar.
Right.
Manowar emerges, beats almost everything in sight except for the Sanford run at this track right back here, Saratoga Racecourse, when he ran into Upset. How much do you think Manowar emerging as, in the words of one of his handlers, the mostest horse that ever was, how much do you think that hurt Sir Barton in the decades moving forward?
I wish I had the quote in front of me because I found it actually later as I was starting to do research on Gallant Fox. But Grantland Rice, so if you've heard that name, he's a respected sports writer from that era. Grantland Rice actually talks about how Manowar basically eclipsed Sir Barton. Like if it weren't for Manowar, we would be talking more about Sir Barton. I mean, he literally says it in a column, and it seems like a throwaway comment, but I found it and I was like, oh, yes. Like, I wish I had this when I was writing the book. It's 10 years after the fact, so it doesn't help me at all. But it was a literal thing. And I say it, I'm sure I've said it a number of times. I may have even said it in the book, where Manowar is this juggernaut that just comes through and just obliterates everything. I mean, it's like Secretariat. It's like now if you have a discussion with anyone about horse racing in the last 50 years, who's your favorite horse? It's inevitably going to be Secretariat. And that's totally cool because, I mean, he obviously deserves the kudos. But in this era, it's the same thing. Like when I'm doing these research on Gallant Fox, and it's everything is Manowar. Like everything harkens back to Manowar. Almost like no other horse existed prior to Manowar. I'm very sorry, but there was only like 100 years of racing prior to Manowar. But he's the gold standard. So I respect Dorothy because she wrote such a fantastic book on Manowar. And really, I read that book for fun in addition to reading it for research. And so I really enjoyed it, but it's just every time Manowar comes up, I'm like, but my dude, man, my horse, he was there too. And he was doing some really, important things. But the style and the overwhelming way that Manowar beat everybody, it's just, you just couldn't beat that. I'm sorry. There's no way to get around him. And he, the press loved him, fans loved him. And, this is a new era. This is the 1920s, and America was looking for a diversion. They were looking for a hero, and Manowar brought that.
And obviously that set up the matchup in 1920, and in all places, Killenworth Park in Ontario, Canada, or in Windsor, Ontario, I should say. And obviously, there's details of that. We're not going to spoil what happened there. That's a good read and a fascinating story on the track surface and what happened with that. We do want people to go out and read Jennifer's book. But I want to fast forward a little bit, the Sir Barton story, so that people read the book. And I've actually been there, and it's a funny story that I don't think we have time for on the podcast, but I'll tell you. But the fact that the monument for Sir Barton is about 45 miles east of Casper, Wyoming, and Douglas, Wyoming, the final resting place. And really what it comes down to is, as good of a horse as Sir Barton was on the racetrack, he was not a sire. And I think, he was tried back east. He ended up in Nebraska, and then he eventually moved on to Wyoming, and was out in Wyoming until his passing. Very fascinating trek for the first Triple Crown winner.
It was an unexpected outcome. So I've been to Audley, which is where he stood stud. So he retired in 1921. He was supposed to race at 5. Ross took on a new trainer who had trained Exterminator as well. And he was just not going to stand up to another year racing, so they retired him. He stood a breeding season in Maryland at Ross's farm, and then they sold him that summer to the Jones brothers, who owned Audley, which was starting up out in Virginia. And he stood at Audley for about a decade. And then for some reason that we've never been able to pinpoint, they decided to move on. And this is still the era of the cavalry, and horse racing was trying really hard to champion the cavalry. so the Jones brother, well, it's actually just one Jones brother at this point. BB moves on from the horse, sells him to the U.S. remount service, and then they place him in, they send him from Virginia to Nebraska, and then from Nebraska out to Wyoming, where he is a service stallion, I guess, out, if you want to call it that, out there for the remount service, standing for about $5 or $10 so that the average person can breed their mare to him. And this is 1932, beginning of 1933, when he's moved out to Wyoming. And in like October of 1937, he kept getting recurrent bouts of colic, which they'd sent for the vet before, but he always seemed to get over. And then he had one last bout of colic, and he just couldn't recover. And so I don't think they euthanized. I think they just found him passed away, in his stall or in a field or something, and they buried him in the Laramie Mountains on the ranch. And then about 1968, they disinterred him and reinterred him in the park in Douglas, Wyoming. So that's how he ended up in Douglas, of all places. I still have not been there because I just have not had a chance to go out that direction. But it's fascinating because they love him. Like, they don't want to give him up. They're like, you will not take this horse from us. And they've built a nice monument, and they had the 100th anniversary last year. They had a little festival for him and all this stuff. So it's a really cool story. And most people get tripped up by the whole $5 or $10 thing. Like, oh man, how low have you fallen that you're only $5 or $10? But it served a purpose, and he was there to generate excitement in the remount service. And that's what, that's why they sold him to the remount, because they wanted to recruit these big name stallions to get people to participate.
It was also the Great Depression, of course. Mm-hmm. So $1 went a little bit differently than you would expect $1 even 5 years prior to that, and certainly now. So the Sir Barton book is fantastic. By all means, go out, give it a read. It's awesome. Jennifer's working on another project right now that we're very excited about, and it's about a couple of other Triple Crown winners that came along a couple of years later, Gallant Fox and Omaha, the father-son Triple Crown winners, the only two that have had that distinction. And Jennifer, you mentioned it, with Man O' War being the gold standard, there are some horses in the early part of the 20th century that we just don't really hear too much about, not to mention the fact that they came along between Man O' War and Citation and the Calumet Juggernaut in the 40s, but Gallant Fox was a heck of a runner. Omaha wound up getting a little streaky in the latter half of his career, but for a couple of weeks as a 3-year-old, he was as good as there was.
Yeah, this was one of those where, to sell the book, I had to write a book proposal. And part of writing a book proposal is you have to do research about what other books are out there. So as I was doing Sir Barton, I kept realizing there were gaps in the scholarship about other Triple Crown winners. So, I mean, you could go and find 100 books on Secretariat, and there's, books on Affirmed, and, Citation has one, and World Away has one that's been since out of print, and on and on and on. But I kept noticing, hey, Gallant Fox and Omaha don't have a book, so that's really weird. Maybe I need to think about that. Count Fleet doesn't have a book. I really need to think about doing that one too. Assault. And so as I was finishing up Sir Barton, and there's a gap that you have between turning in a book and seeing it come out in reality. So I had about a year where I was intermittently working on Sir Barton to get it ready. And so I started working on Gallant Fox and Omaha, and the more I dived into it, the more I saw that we really, really needed this book. We don't know nearly as much as we think we do about Gallant Fox and Omaha. And it's really fascinating because William Woodward had written a memoir of Gallant Fox the year after Gallant Fox retired. There's a whole memoir. It's about 100 pages long about Gallant Fox's entire career from basically birth until he retired. And it's all written by William Woodward, and I'm reading through it and finding out things I didn't know, and I thought I knew quite a bit. And so I'm really excited about this because I get to cover, and I'm not doing Bel Air, I'm just doing Gallant Fox and Omaha. And the idea was, this is a transitional moment in horse racing. This is where we're transitioning out of this the era of Man o' War and into what we think of more as modern horse racing, with the Triple Crown, a starting gate, you know, more horse racing, more, you know, like countrywide horse racing, and you know, then you've got Omaha, who becomes the first and only Triple Crown winner to race in Europe. The only one. Like, there have been 13, and none of them have even smelled England since Omaha got back. Like, they haven't even seen England. They're like, it's this pipe dream, and it's not going to happen. So, you know, every time, the more I read, the more I'm like, I just need to tell this story, because there's so much of why we do things the way we do now wrapped up in their history. So I'm really, really excited about it.
I can tell. And like we've been talking about, I'm a history geek. One of the things that I'm most proud of is the fact that I've got a Hall of Fame vote, and being able to be a part of that kind of institution and pay tribute to the history of the game. It's freaking awesome. And that's why I was so pumped when JD said, hey, let's get Jennifer on the show. Oh, okay. Yes, all for that.
Yeah, I'm so jealous, like, how you got a vote. I would be in there, like, being obnoxious, like, you need to nominate this for us. You need to do this for us.
Thanks, Brian Bouye. Appreciate you.
Brian, hey, I'm here. I want a vote too.
I'll sing your praises for you. I promise.
I'm a you know, reputable source of information. But I'm really, really excited about this book, and you know, I work on it. I'm still on Gallant Fox. I'm still kind of, I haven't written the first draft yet, so I'm hoping to have the first draft done by later this year or early next year. And I've gotten almost to the end of Gallant Fox's career, and I'm about to start on Omaha. And I like, the more I do this, the more I can't wait for this book to be done, because I just know people are going to be so excited to see this part of it, because we love Seabiscuit. I mean, you love that era, and you love Seabiscuit and, you know, War Admiral and that, and this is that time period, and it's a whole lot of fun to do, especially when I was trying to figure out what the heck the starting gate looked like. Like, we're using this janky starting gate that's the precursor, you know, there are many iterations between this starting gate and the one that we end up with. And I'm trying to find photographs of it, and I'm, you know, bugging these, like, archivists. Do you have a photograph of this gate? And they're like, what is it called? And, you know, how to describe that to people in a book? Like, and you try to find a picture of it and the minutia of it. And I'm sure your reader, your viewers are going to be like, what is she talking about? Just wait. Just wait.
Well,
Please.
Yeah, I mean, you look at, and a lot of people don't know this, and maybe I have an interest in Gallant Fox for some reason that you guys will have to just figure out on your own. But you look at the early, I have no idea. So you look at even the early progeny, you know, obviously Omaha there, but you look at Granville, you look at Flares. I mean, there's so many interesting things where I could see that the Gallant Fox part of the book can go down a rabbit hole if you're not careful, because there was just so much. You know, early on, I mean, you know, Granville Horse of the Year, Flares, who was the second American to win to go over and win a big race in England, the Ascot Gold Cup. I mean, there's so much there that's just fascinating, from a really fascinating time in horse racing as well.
And it's just fun, because it's so reminiscent of what we do now. But it's the 30s, and you know, we really enjoy that time period because we see so much of what our time period looks like there. And you know, if you've seen Seabiscuit, you've seen all these all these old movies, you know, from the 30s about horse racing. There's Clark Gable, I think, in a movie called Saratoga, and you know, the Marx Brothers had a movie that I think they filmed at Santa Anita or something like that. Like, you know, these. With Sir Barton and Man o' War, like, we have little snippets of visuals of them, but we don't have a lot of visuals. But with Gallant Fox and in Omaha, I'm finding more and more, like, newsreels and other things that show the horses. And it's such a nice contrast to where I was working before, where I was having to dig and scrape for any sort of imagery to be able to show people what the horse looked like or even what he looked like just racing. Like I have so few photographs of Sir Barton actually running, you know. But like Gallant Fox, I kept finding like newsreels, and I'd share them on social media. Like, here's Lord Derby at the Derby, and you guys look at this. Look at this. You know, here's which one winning at Saratoga in 1929. Like, if you don't know who which one is, you will find out very soon. And you know, it's it's like, this is so cool to see all these, you know, things that look like Saratoga in 1929 looks a lot like Saratoga in 2020.
Yep, one
Very
of the many
bad.
reasons I love it. I got to ask the one question as a Saratoga guy. If I say the words Jim Dandy, do I have to duck?
No,
Okay, good.
no, that was one part of the research I was really looking forward to, because like I said, you know, William Woodward wrote a memoir of Gallant Fox's career, and I got a copy of it from the Keeneland Library, and I was like, oh, cannot wait to dive into this part of this book. How is he going to explain how all this happened? And of course, in addition to Woodward's perspective on it, I had all the newspapers and stuff like that. Jim Dandy won fair and square. I'm sorry. Um, Earl Sandy got caught up in a duel that he should not have been in. It was probably poor writing tactics on his side. They were compromised by an outside post, so there was that. So it was Sun Falcon on the rail, then Jim Dandy, then Which One, and then Gallant Fox. So had Which One and Gallant Fox been in other positions, you would not have had that confrontation that happened that allowed Jim Dandy to duck in. But like any other fortunate, you know, misfit, Jim Dandy got the best of a bad situation because, you know, he just happened to be in the right place at the right time. Never really won another race of that caliber ever again in his life. And the irony is that Upset, who beat Man of War, owned Which One, who was in the duel with Gallant Fox. So it was like, hey, HP Whitney, BT Dubs, you're involved in another, like, you know, graveyard of champions moment at
Eh,
Saratoga.
it was an off track that day. It was fine.
I love this stuff. I just got to tell you, this is great. I'm such a history nerd. This is so cool.
Yeah.
I am really looking forward to reading this book whenever it comes out. And if you need a proofreader, Jennifer, I'm just going to tell you, I know a guy, and the guy works cheap.
Yeah, I usually end up trying to solicit for one or two people to help me make sure that the book is readable. I mean, honestly, because you know, when I finished Sir Barton, it clocked in at about 115,000 words, give or take, and my publisher was like, "It really needs to be about 95." Okay. So I had to cut about 20,000 words. Now, if you ask me, it's perfect as it is, and how dare you suggest that it not be published as it was? I mean, come on, I spent like 5 years on the book.
You know, I'm a
So
writer too. I get it. I mean, it's one of those things where you send it in, you pour your blood, sweat, and tears out there, and then it reminds you of the old Hunter S. Thompson quote: "Cut yourself open, begin to bleed, and then start writing." That's what
it,
that's like.
it doesn't bother me because, you know, I spent so many years in a classroom teaching writing to college students. So I really was used to that because I had done it to other people. And then I'd had it done to me as a master's student, and then, you know, working on my graduate certificate. So I was a technical writer. Like, I've done all these things. It only bothered me in that I was like, you can't objectively ask me to excise this material. Like, you have to have someone else come in and do this for me, because I'm going to argue for every single thing that and how it integrates into the story. So I really needed readers other than myself to come in and say, okay, you can lose this portion and you don't lose, you know, the overall book. That's what I really needed. And so fortunately I had people like Jamie Nicholson, who, you know, has written a couple of books on horse racing himself, that was able to look at the manuscript and go, okay, you can, you know, excise here, here, and here, and it will tighten up the book so much more. It was actually Jamie's idea to move the prologue where it was. So if you've read the book, you know what the prologue, what I'm referring to. I had that in a later portion of the book, and he suggested moving it to the beginning to open it.
So
I really like
if you want those words to live on, maybe I record an audio book for you, and just we throw those missing 20,000 words back in from an earlier draft.
it's really not that interesting. If you read the book as it is now, it's so much better. But I'm sorry, I spent a long time working on this book. So, like, I just want it. But the thing about Gallant Fox and Omaha is I'm really going to have to be judicious about how I use the space.
Yeah.
Because it's going to be a lot of material to cover. But the good thing is that it'll be our first real in-depth visit into what they did on the racetrack. Because I don't really think that many people are familiar with exactly how good both horses were.
Yeah, which is a cool situation to be in, and being able to tell that story, and obviously when you first started the Sir Barton book, I don't think you understood where it could go. I don't think you saw on the 100th anniversary calling riders up at a race at Pimlico.
That was a pipe dream I had. I actually emailed Stronach Group, to the website, and I'm thinking, no one's going to read this. They're not going to give a crap about me. And then I got a phone call from the Maryland Jockey Club. Hey, we would like to invite you to Pimlico for Black Eyed Susan Day, because they usually do. They have authors come in and do signings. So I was there with Linda Carroll, who wrote Out of the Clouds, and then Mike Rowe's mom, who'd written a book as well. And there was me, and I'm sitting here like, dude, I'm in Pimlico, and I'm gonna be signing books, and here comes Mike Smith, and here comes Jimmy Barnes, and there goes Bob Baffert walking really fast. And then, like, while I was on the phone talking about this day, Diana Harbaugh, who's the event coordinator, she said, "Oh, by the way, we're going to have you do Riders Up." And I went, "Wait, you got the email?" Like, yes. And I managed to eke out like Preakness tickets too, on top of already being going to Black Eyed Susan Day. So, like, yes, thank you very much. I'm all over this. I did a Keeneland Library lecture. I got to go to Saratoga and go to the National Museum of Racing and do a presentation there. I got to sit in the National Museum of Racing box for the day at Saratoga, which is very nice. Thank you, Brian. And I got to go to Audley. They threw a party for the 100th anniversary, and I got to be there for that. And I mean, I had so much fun. I had no idea. Mike Smith heard me give a presentation at FanFest at Churchill Downs, and he came by and he wanted a book signed. Like, Mike Smith wanted me to sign a book. Like, hello, it's like the Beatles coming to your. Hey, it's very nice to meet you. And I'm over here like, dude, I am nobody, y'all. Nobody. And here's Mike Smith, like, he was so excited or impressed by my presentation that he wanted me to sign a book. And I was sitting there like, okay, I'm good, I'm done. I'm gonna die happy right now.
That's incredible.
That's one of the things about horse racing I love so much, is that everywhere I went, something like that happened. I got to meet you guys. I got to meet Brian. I got to see Steve Fick. I got to meet Steve Haskin. I'm, at Keeneland, and I'm at Pimlico, and I'm at Churchill, and I'm just like, this is a dream come true. And so I'm really looking forward to where this next book takes me.
Yeah, you mentioned Steve Haskin. Steve Haskin wrote the foreword to your book, and check out KentuckyPress.com. It's obviously available at other fine retailers, but if you have the few bucks to spare, always buy it directly from the publisher if you can through Kentucky Press. It helps a lot. And yeah, don't look at the sale price on Amazon right now. Look at Kentucky Press and help out the fine folks there, because they're doing a great job. The Horses in History, it's a whole section on KentuckyPress.com that you can check out some other great books on the topic. Jennifer, anything else you want to plug? Obviously, we have your Twitter handle for the Sir Barton, which is kind of your personal Twitter handle, but also you have a Twitter handle for the upcoming book with the Foxes of Bel Air.
Yeah, I'm trying to do both. So I have Twitter, Instagram for Sir Barton, which is this has just become my personal one. adopted it. It was like, there's no more trying to market with this. I'm just going to use it. And then for Foxes of Bel Air, it's at Foxes of Bel Air on Instagram and on Twitter. And you can find me on Facebook. I'm obnoxious on Facebook. And then, like, Adrian's probably finding out today, like, oh, God, she's obnoxious.
No, I love that. Are you kidding me? That's great. I love what you do. This is fantastic.
And I'm on, I write for Pass the Wire as well. So if you ever go to passthewire.com, I do some stuff for them. And I do work for the Racing Biz. For Maryland Mid-Atlantic Racing, I do some stuff for Frank as well, and I'm trying to expand outward and put my fingers in lots of pots. So whenever anyone needs like a writer to do something, like here I am. And of course, I'm working on as soon as I'm done with the column I'm working on right now, I'm going to start back up on Foxes of Bel Air. So you don't see, my camera does not show you the like mass of research that is pretty much the entirety of my office. But if you look on Instagram, you see pictures of just how like spread out I have to be to get this done. So I just, follow me and listen, hear about more. I have other projects I'm trying to do that apparently I either don't need to sleep or I just need to clone myself, one or the other. So.
If you figure out how to clone yourself, let me know so I can take a couple of days off.
I'm trying, man. I just I don't know. I have so many ideas. I just either need more money or a clone. I haven't figured out which one would be more useful.
Or more hours in the day. That could work too.
The more hours a day, maybe. If I didn't sleep, maybe I'd be okay. I don't know.
Jennifer Kelly, the writer of a book on Sir Barton, a tremendous work at that. Currently working on the Foxes of Bel Air about Gallant Fox and Omaha. You don't want to miss that one. Jennifer, it was an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Best of luck with the book. And like I said, if you need somebody to take a look, by all means, send something my way.
Oh, thank you guys. I really appreciate it. It was so much fun. Thank you.
Thanks again to Jennifer Kelly for stopping by this week's edition of Champagne and JD. We had a great time talking about some of the things that she's worked on and is working on. Now we're going to dive into the Rico Woodbine Mile, the feature coming up on Saturday at the track in Ontario. We've got a field of 8 runners set to go postward, headlined by a dual Grade 1 winner that you've heard of, War of Will, last year's Preakness winner, coming in off of a win in the Makers 46 Mile at Keeneland, the race that I should have been at had COVID not ruined everything, JD. Not to say that I'm bitter. Wait a minute. Yes, I still am. However, the Woodbine Mile, a field of 8, an interesting morning line we were talking about before we went on the air here. War of Will at 2-1 seems about right, but I think you can poke holes in the morning line of just about every other runner in this field.
Yeah, as we look at the first page of graphics, and I will just tell you that War of Will be alone on his own second page of graphics. So we're going to talk about this one for a few minutes here. Obviously, Admiralty Pier is dual entered in the same day, which I really wish that they would not allow at the same track. Dual entered into the Sing Spell, which is the Grade 3 and running in race 7, and the Woodbine Mile in race 9. So we still do not have an official decision on that from Barbara Menshaw. I will say that if I were in her shoes and the ownership's shoes, you have 8 horses and $1 million Grade 1, and then you have 10 horses and $150,000 Grade 3. I would stick in this spot, but Shrill Spite being 8-1, probably the first thing that jumps out of you of the morning line. This is obviously a very hyped horse that was hoping to enter the Kentucky Derby before a small injury cost that. But obviously, a lot of people saying, hey, if Roger Atfield, who is the royalty of Canadian trainers, if he thought that this horse had a solid chance in the Kentucky Derby, that's almost good enough for me. This is a very green horse, but a very talented horse. So I see that horse being bet down closer probably to 4-1. And the other interesting horse in relation to the morning line is probably Value Proposition at 6-1 with Chad Brown. Chad Brown knows a thing or two about winning big turf stakes, Andrew.
Yeah, that's for darn sure. And Value Proposition was actually entered a couple of weeks ago at Saratoga, scratched out of that race, and has since been working lights out. Now, is he a Grade 1 kind of horse? He hasn't shown that in the afternoons of yet. We might get a chance to see if he is that kind of horse on Saturday afternoon. And JD, I have to tell you, if he's anywhere close to his 6-1 morning line, I think this runner could be wait for it, a value proposition. Huh?
Well, it's a short-term value proposition because as long as he remains a Ridgeling, the value has to be withdrawn now. If you catch my drift.
I was just trying to hold this pose as long as I could. I can't do it anymore.
I made a salient point that you just were frozen to. So
no, if I was frozen and pixelated Andrew is what usually picks winners. So hey, I'll go over there and I'll play games with the router and come back and we'll have some fun. But we did take our top 4 selections and we're going to have them up on the screen for you. We'll go through them. JD, would you like to go first? Would you like me to go first? How do you want to do this?
I would like you to go first just because I think I'm upsetting the apple cart a little more than you are.
All right, youngest player goes first. That's me. I have chased March to the Arch in almost every single start, every time I have seen him run. I feel as though every time this horse runs, I find reasons to like him. Well, there's a couple of reasons that I like him to get the money in this spot. First of all, he loves Woodbine. He had a huge win in the King Edward last time out, was much the best. He is 2 for 2 over the E.P. Taylor turf course. The other reason I really like this horse, JD, is there is a lot of early speed signed on, and that is what this runner needs. He is a stone closer, and the faster they go early, the better this horse's chances figure to be. He's 5-2 on the morning line. We mentioned that morning line's going to be kind of interesting to watch. I think he drifts up a little bit. I think he may very well wind up the third choice. If he does, I think that's a pretty gigantic overlay. I think a lot of handicappers are going to gravitate to the other Mark Casse runner, War of Will, and that could elevate the price on March to the Arch. So I'm actually going with a medium range price in here because I think March to the Arch gets the setup he wants over a track he wants to run on, and I think he gets the money in the Woodbine Mile.
I'm going in a different direction. While I do really like March to the Arch, and you are probably going to see March to the Arch appear on my list very quickly.
That's called foreshadowing, kids.
Maybe this is my heart more than my brain.
It is.
But Starship Jubilee is my top choice here. And I'm going to give you some reasons why. Obviously, I mean, this is a mare trying against the boys for only the second time in her career. And if you want to go back to the first time in her career, it was a 5th-place effort. I have to pull the date really quickly. It was early on in her career. It was her 3rd stakes race. It was the Sky Classic at Woodbine. And it was a Grade 2 affair, lost to Can't Help Believing. I was having one of those brain moments where you see the horse's name and try to figure out what it actually says. But, that was a 6-horse field, finished 5th on that day, but that was August 20th, 2017. So it's been a while. Obviously, this is a race for 3-year-olds and up, and what we have is a 7-year-old mare. So immediately you're starting to say, hey, why is this horse entered in this race? Well, this horse has literally won everything that she is eligible for at Woodbine, and in most cases, she's won it multiple times. So you look at, okay, why was she not in the Canadian last weekend? Well, she was the 2-time defending champion of that race. Well, why isn't she going to run in the E.P. Taylor in a couple weeks? 2-time defending champion of that race. I mean, at some point, it's near the end of her career. I really like what the connections are doing here and giving her a shot. Where I really like her in this spot is I think she's the most versatile horse in the field. If there, for whatever reason, is a very soft pace, which, again, Admiralty Pier, if Admiralty Pier scratches out of this race, it could change the complexion a little bit on the front end. She can go up and contend with that. You look at the Ballston Spa 2 back at Saratoga. Hit the gate at the start, was 13 lengths back at first call, and gets up and wins by a neck. And there's several races in her career that you can point to that she's come back as a deep closer and won. She wins from just off the pace. She's just a really talented horse who still, for some reason, and we'll never know why, these horses obviously exist, but, $6,500 OBS purchase, August 2014, has won $1.6 million on the racetrack, started as a claimer, and is now one of the most accomplished horses in recent Canadian history. Not bad for a Florida bred. I have Starship Jubilee on top here.
I have nothing against Starship Jubilee. She's a really cool horse. I just prefer others in this spot. Starship Jubilee may well show up on my list of top 4. And we'll move on now to our second selections. Mine is War of Will. He may very well just be better than this group. He's won grade 1s on both surfaces. I like the outside draw. That should give the rider plenty of options in this race. My hesitation with him, and the reason I think he might be a little bit overbet, is if you watch the race at Keeneland in the last furlong, it didn't seem like any of the runners, JD, wanted to win that race. It seemed like War of Will was just sort of advancing a little bit while everyone else was running in place. I'm not entirely sure of the quality of the runners that he beat that day. Mind you, this isn't an all-caps grade 1 race. I don't think we can have that argument. Rushing Fall is probably the best turf miler of any gender in North America right now. I think she'd have this field over a barrel. This is a good spot for War of Will. Mark Casse has a very powerful 3-horse contingent here. He saddles March to the Arch. He also saddles Olympic Runner. I prefer March to the Arch. If War of Will won, would it surprise me? No. War of Will's a cool horse. Won the Preakness last year. Comes in off of a grade 1 win at Keeneland. If War of Will wins, yeah, logical. Wouldn't quite surprise me, but March to the Arch I certainly prefer, especially given his likely price.
Yeah, I look at, obviously the Maker's Mark Mile was a big thing for War of Will to get past, was the first stakes win on turf. And I shouldn't say the first stakes win on turf. I should say the first win on turf. Obviously has been in stakes company, ran way back in the day, I shouldn't say back in the day for a 4-year-old, but ran in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile turf as a 2-year-old, ran in the Bourbon, ran in the summer at Woodbine, and actually equated himself quite well, finishing second, beaten by 3/4 of a length to Fog of War. So, not bad. I just look at the key wins in War of Will's career have been on the dirt, and I think you'll see in my selections, I still think I want to see War of Will compete and win on the turf one more time before I back this horse in a turf race. So I'm going to go and echo a little bit of what Andrew said here. March to the Arch is in my second spot. And again, if the pace is hot and heavy up front, which we all expect it to be, Timeform US has the pace projector on this race as a fast pace. March to the Arch is a closer that can come from far back, can come from just off. I mean, has done a little bit of everything in the career. I think the mile is the best distance for this horse, and we've seen, just a bit of an up and down season, and part of that may just be, 5 tracks in the last 5 races, getting a lot of frequent flyer miles, getting a lot of different jockeys, and we'll get another one in Patrick Husbands up on Saturday, but extremely talented gelding, and somebody I like to come strong, and obviously I think a must include if you're wagering on a trifecta, superfecta, you've got to have March to the Arch in multiple places, but I think a good win chance as well, Andrew.
The key is also going to be the condition of the turf course. March to the Arch, to borrow horse racing parlance, likes hearing his feet rattle. The firmer that turf course is, the better he's likely to run. So watch the track condition and play accordingly. Still, I think March to Arch, definitely the horse to beat. My third selection is JD's top pick. We actually agree on this race more often than most of our prior discussions of this ilk. I picked Starship Jubilee third. She's a nice horse. She's a fantastic story. I think she may very well go off favorite in this race. I think she's going to get back down off of that 4-1 morning line, largely because of the filly against the boys mentality, but also the mentality of she really likes Woodbine. She's done her best running over this turf course. Would it stun me if she rallied and got the money here? Stun is probably a strong word, but it would be a mild surprise simply because Starship Jubilee looked pretty good winning 2 back, but that win didn't age particularly well when she came back in the Diana because Sister Charlie, for as good as she is, and she's still pretty good, she's not the Sister Charlie of 2018, 2019. So saying she beat Sister Charlie 2 back off of that kind of a layoff, it's not quite as impressive now as it was when it happened. Starship Jubilee, a horse that I think you need to use at least underneath, but I think a win may be just a little bit too much. And watch the tote board, because if money shows up on Starship Jubilee, that may very well tick up the odds on March to the Arch, which I certainly wouldn't complain about.
Yeah, getting back to your point about weather, I was looking that up as we talked about, as you talked about Starship Jubilee, and 53 degrees is the high on Saturday, and that's Fahrenheit. Obviously, it's not 53 Celsius, because that would be a melting inferno.
Absurd, yeah.
They don't race in melting infernos. But one thing we have seen is this time of year at Woodbine, and Emily Gullickson, my colleague, sometimes colleague, coined this phrase. So I'm stealing it from her, but I'm giving her full credit. It's windbine. I mean, we're looking at the forecast is steady 15 to 20 mile an hour winds, and it's kind of a crosswind on the turn. So how it's been the last couple weekends, you don't want to be on the outside. War of Will's on the outside, just saying, breaking out of the gate. Not necessarily where you want to be or where people have been. So War of Will might be the best horse, really going to have to be the best horse. But again, you talked about it. There's a value proposition in this race.
I liked it better when I said it, JD.
And I do think it's the value is in the Chad Brown Turf Runner.
Sounds backwards, doesn't it?
That doesn't sound right, but really you've got a lightly raced 4-year-old, the Ridgeling, as I mentioned, the only European bred in this field, and obviously debuted in the States at Belmont. Has only ran the New York circuit, 4 races at Belmont, 1 at Saratoga. But, there's a lot to like here on paper. There's a lot to like from a pedigree standpoint. There's a lot to like about this horse in general. Obviously, I think the Ridgeling status made a late start to the races for this horse. But a lot of talent. You look at that allowance race back on June 3rd. I watched that video several times at Belmont. I mean, that's a really solid win and could have been a win by a lot more. Was a little rank early, still trying to figure things out. And I think third off the layoff, which was almost a full year layoff, I think we're going to see the best of value proposition that we've seen so far in the career. Is it good enough to win against this level of competition? I'm not sure. On paper, breeding, the talent, the glimpses that we've seen, and the numbers that we see on paper, they all seem to add up that this horse might be good enough to win this race.
You just made my case for me, because value proposition is my 4th selection. I think value proposition is a must-use if you're going in the vertical exotics or even the horizontal exotics where you throw in a couple of Bs or maybe a C. Value proposition will not be favored. He will not be the second choice. He will most likely not be the third choice. JD, the horse that you have picked in 4th, 8-1 on the morning line. I don't think there is any chance of that, and if I'm wrong, I will gladly own it. Value proposition is 6-1 on the morning line. You may very well get double digits on that horse come post time, and if that's the case, that's a significant overlay.
Yeah, and you have to look. I mean, there's a lot of things to talk about here with Schulspite, and it's kind of strange that we're saying there's a lot to talk about about a 3-year-old colt facing older on a surface that they haven't run over. I shouldn't say that. They've never run a mile at this. They ran 7 furlongs on the EP Taylor, but was training on the dirt track to prepare for the Kentucky Derby. Now has 2 works over the Woodbine synthetic, going back to the turf. Obviously, again, I mean, if there's anybody that knows that he's got a talented horse, it's Roger Attfield. I'm never going to second guess where Roger Attfield wants to place a horse, especially with a homebred for Charles Fitke. I mean, there's just so much there that says, okay, maybe this horse wasn't going to win the Derby, but I think they had a competitive horse, and they were trying to do best and try to get the horse ready to go as quickly as possible. I don't know if, heading before the Derby, there were some works at Woodbine that were really interesting, and there were some team tandem works where Attfield used 6 other horses to kind of give some scenarios over the course of a work for Schulspite. there's lots of things here where they tried to give this horse a schooling very quickly. It's been very green, but has been much the best in the two efforts. Breeding-wise, you look at Speightstown. I don't really have to say anything about Speightstown. If you're not familiar with the dam Perfect Sherrill, Perfect Sherrill stuck around a little. Actually, I should say the same amount as Speightstown on the racetrack. Both had 16 starts. Perfect Sherrill actually has more career earnings than even the great Speightstown. Now, obviously, part of that is just inflation. There's, 8 or 9 years apart from their careers. But Perfect Sherrill was a great turf horse. And the one question mark has been her first progeny have not been great on the racetrack. But maybe finally have that in Perfect Speidi, who's a full sister to Sherrill Speight. Who's won 2 races, has $44,000 in career earnings so far. I just think there's too much unknown here, and there's too much positive between the breeder owner side of this and the trainer, and the ability that we've seen on the track so far, despite being very green. It's an 8-horse field. We're giving top 4s here, so you look at the numbers and. It's pretty easy to come up with 4 horses you like. Sherrill Speight is going to get bet. 8-1 morning line is not going to happen. I'm not in love with this horse, but there's enough there that makes me think that this horse has a chance.
Yeah, I understand that, and I get that. My big thing is 3rd career start. Just 2 weeks ago, they decided, you know what, we're not going to ship to Kentucky. He's got a thing. I don't like horses who have things when they don't necessarily have the foundations built to be able to get past that mental hurdle. Sherrill Speight could very well win and make me look like an idiot. Many horses have done that over the years. Never let me forget that. But I just cannot endorse a 3-year-old in career start number 3 going against a bunch of seasoned older horses like this in this kind of spot. And if Sherrill Speight wins, we may very well have seen your Breeders' Cup Mile winner. But I don't think that kind of effort is in the cards come Saturday on a really good card at Woodbine. And JD, I know you're going to like this. That acts as the season premiere of season 3 of the Daily Gallop contest. I made the playoffs in season 2. I am back again for season 3, looking to hold things down for the Champagne and JD show.
I got a pedigree thing wrong, so I have to correct myself.
You got something wrong? How dare you?
Perfect Speidi, of course, is a colt, not a filly, so it is a full brother to Sherrill Speight. My apologies, but I did look at and double check on Perfect Speidi. Been running at Woodbine, actually ran at Woodbine a week and a half ago, finished 4th in allowance optional claiming. Has 2 career victories, broke the maiden at Laurel, and then won an allowance event at Penn National. So a bit different levels of competition for a full sibling to a 3rd-time starter in one of the most prestigious races in Canada. So, again, there's some trepidation here in my voice, but it's an 8-horse field, and I don't like War of Will. Really, I think me putting Sherrill Speight in 4th is spiting War of Will, just because I think War of Will is going to be pace compromised in this race. I don't love the setup. I don't love being the outside horse here. It's tough to really see based on the racing we've seen lately with the wind and potentially wide around the first turn. That's been a death sentence to any horse that's been wanting to win. And really that's War of Will's game. And I still keep, thinking back to the Breeders' Cup Classic and that just mighty just give up. I think this, speaking of the horse's will, I think when War of Will sometimes gets in a battle and gets in a prolonged battle, this horse has thrown in the towel in the past. And you even look in the Shoemaker, and I watched that back from Santa Anita in May, and that was there's some excuses there first up, but that was a horse that looked like they were going to win the race easily, and then ends up finishing 5th. And I'm not convinced Raging Bull or Next Shares are of the same caliber as War of Will. I'm talking a bit in circles, Andrew, but that sometimes happens.
I'm not going to talk you against a favorite that you don't like, especially when War of Will 2-1 on the morning line. I think that's about accurate. maybe not the favorite, maybe second choice. We both think Starship Jubilee is coming down in odds as well. What I'm hoping is that allows March to the Arch to drift up. And JD, you like that one a little bit too. This is very rare, the fact that we actually agree on a little bit here. So I'm going to take this moment. I'm going to relish it. And as I relish it, I'm going to lead in to our final thoughts here. And I'm just going to rub it in because you know what? We talked a little bit about my NFL picks in week 1. 4-0. Sorry, did you see that? 4-0. Here's hoping that continues. I have no idea where that came from, but showed a little bit of talent doing that last year. Maybe that wasn't a fluke.
I'm very proud of your performance. One of your wins was in one of the worst football games I've ever seen on Monday night. Clock management-wise for my Broncos, not the brightest.
The Titans should have won that game by 2 touchdowns. Steven Gostkowski missed about 9,000 kicks. Just saying.
My final thoughts. You know where this is going, Andrew.
Yeah, that's why I let in with a positive note, because I figured you were going to end us on a downer.
So Vincent Francia, the general manager of Turf Paradise, made a note to the Horsemen, and you can find this on Twitter, and you can actually find this on the official Turf Paradise Facebook page, which is allowing comments on this post, which is very interesting. And there's been some interesting back and forth on it. But Turf Paradise is offering to run a meet January 2nd through May 1st. And May 1st, 2021, as crazy as that sounds, is the first Saturday in May. So that's Kentucky Derby Day. Seems like we just ran that race. I don't know.
We did.
So they have conditions, and they want to dissolve the Arizona HBPA as one of the conditions, and have a new horseman organization and elect a new board. And they also, there's been some arbitration between the HBPA and Turf Paradise about the purse fund. And apparently Turf Paradise had control of the purse fund, and now the horsemen do. So the other condition is Turf Paradise would like the Horsemen's Fund returned to them, which is $2.1 million, which isn't enough to actually. It wouldn't be the full purse fund to actually hold a meet that's going to last that many days, but it's a good solid chunk of it at Turf Paradise. I mean, it's the vast majority of that money for the purse fund. So it has not been received well so far.
No.
Yeah, I don't want to take sides. I'm just trying to give the opinion out there and just say that, Turf Paradise has said that, time is of the essence. Vincent Francia, in posts that he's been responding to, says basically he needs 6 weeks to get the track together. If they want to run in January, that means horses need to start training over the track probably around Thanksgiving. So literally, he's probably giving them 2 weeks to decide, and make a decision and disband a board and create a new board. And this board would have to create bylaws. That's one of their their conditions as well, and that the group would have to elect a board of directors, including a president and officers. They feel like they can just dictate these terms, which is just. It's interesting. That's all I'm going to say on it. It's very interesting. So if you've been following the Arizona horse racing circus, this is the latest chapter. If you're just following it on this show, I will continue to provide updates. If you are interested enough to follow it outside of the show, I wish you luck, because you will be left scratching your head. And depending on your level of interest in it, you may bang your head against the wall a time or two. But hopefully, in looking at this from a positive viewpoint, Andrew, hopefully this means that we can have racing in Arizona again in January. Right now, it looked like we were going to be waiting until February for Relito to start their season. But if Turf Paradise can run January 2nd, it's a positive thing for Arizona horsemen, regardless of the terms. I mean, we need to run in Arizona, or we're going to lose gambling, we're going to lose ADWs, we're going to lose a lot of things. So,
thinking with your head on this, not with your heart. Simple yes or no question. Does Turf Paradise run in January next year?
No.
Okay. We'll obviously keep following this situation. We'll give you as many thoughts as we have, and who knows, maybe we'll have some Arizona guests on here. We might well have a point counterpoint segment where the only thing I have to do is sit back, relax, drink an Arnold Palmer, and watch the fireworks go down. That'd be the easiest hour of my broadcasting career, I think. We got to try that.
I'm going to say no.
How dare you? You are 0 to negative fun, JD, and I hope you know that. Anyway, that'll wrap things up for this week's edition of Champagne and JD. If you like what we do, subscribe to our channel, share this liberally on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can follow me on Twitter at Andrew Champagne. Fancy enough right down there. You can follow JD Fox at Horse Tickets. He'll be doing a lot of fun stuff with ABR and Breeders' Cup, just some really cool stuff. He'll be on the show with Ren Carruthers later this week talking about the Woodbine Miles, so make sure you stay tuned for that. And at any rate, Saturday's going to be a lot of fun at Woodbine. Going to be a lot of fun around the country. It's opening weekend at Belmont Park for their fall championship meet. Racing going on around the country. So regardless of where you're betting or what you're betting, make sure you get involved. For JD Fox, I am Andrew Champagne. That concludes this week's edition of Champagne and JD. From both of us to everybody in the world right now, stay off the beaches.
See you guys.